WEFUNK. We funk.
And in honor of opening day of the Major League Baseball season and baseball being back, let's go Mets. We here at Big LW's Jammin World podcast want to take a very special look at the musical baseball connections here in this Jammin World where all things collide and get broken down by your boy Big L. Big L! Well, Big LW anyway. And I teased it in the first set that worlds would collide, and that is what's going down now. As really two of America's national pastimes, music and baseball, and they might have a lot more in common than one might realize. And we will take a look at some of those connections here now. And the first one is really more of a feeling, you know, like an instinctual, a Pavlovian response, I'd say, to the sounds of summer. And, of course, the organ playing, and you sitting in the park watching the sand and grass, and Mets lose 8-1, but it all goes down to that soundtrack of the organ. And really no other sport is so synonymous with the sound of an instrument, where when you hear that organ, it just sounds like summer, it just sounds like baseball. Not any other sport, really, at least in American sport. I guess maybe in soccer or in football, as the rest of the world calls it, but in football, remember in the World Cup a couple years ago when it was the World Cup was in Africa and all those fucking maniacs had those didgeridoos, those like weird horns that they were blowing. Yeah, that was the organ of soccer, and it kind of blew. Let's face it. Or as well, I guess there's a lot of tribal drumming that goes along in international soccer, but in the States. Around the 1930s, we invented a thing called the organ, and that's been playing the soundtrack, playing the soundtrack to the sounds of summer ever since. And you get the organ playing, and of course, Take Me Out to the Ball Game, the first real, linchpin musical baseball connection, where we literally pause in the. What kind of fucking sport has a song that you literally pause and the entire stadium sings the entire song? And it's got to be honestly, like in America, I'd say every single person over the age of 8 years old knows the lyrics to Take Me Out to the Ball Game. It's got to be the most well-known song in all of America. There's not an American over, maybe Jingle Bells. If you want to count Jingle Bells, even in this whole, post-O'Reilly war on Christmas, if you want to count Jingle Bells, I guess maybe Jingle Bells and Take Me Out to the Ball Game have got to be the most well-known songs by every single person in America knows the lyrics to Take Me Out to the Ball Game. And such a weird tradition, really, when you look at it from an outsider's perspective, that every single game, we all pause in the middle of it to sing, Take Me Out to the Ball Game. A tradition that I guess really, immortalized in the friendly confines of Wrigley Field, where an alcoholic announcer named Harry Carey started the sing-along tradition. And, of course, in Wrigley Field, it's really been taken up to the next level over the years with lots of celebrity. It's kind of now gotten a little, like everything in Wrigley, not to be the old-timer that's only 35, but but like everything in Wrigley, it's gotten a little too commercial, where now it's like, any artist with an album or actor with the movie coming out does, Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, followed by sings the Take Me Out to the Ball Game at Wrigley. However, started off as an amazing, really still is an amazingly cool tradition, and started off more, kind of honest beginnings, we'll just say, where throughout the 90s there was lots of cool, Bill Murray and, Will Ferrell, and kind of started off more as Cubs fans. I think Eddie Vedder did a Take Me Out to the Ball Game, and it kind of, really was like local Cubs fans, celebrities Cubs fans would every once in a while take the lead, and really kind of took that whole tradition to the next level, I'd say. A tradition that has then really kind of been added upon and individualized in these specific stadiums across America. I guess most notably Fenway Park in Boston, which famously added a Sweet Caroline sing-along after Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Here in Queens, of course, we do Lou Monte's Lazy Mary, which I guess, eat my balls, Sweet Caroline. We got Lou Monte's Lazy Mary. So that's become a beloved tradition here in Queens for the Mets fans, and I'm sure every stadium across the country has added their own little personal touch on the Take Me Out to the Ball Game 7th inning stretch tradition, which is really not the only song even tradition in baseball, as there are lots of other kind of baseball songs, traditional songs. Of course, like I mentioned, I'm a Mets fan here. In Queens, we have Meet the Mets, Greet the Mets, and then as well the Yankees have, who like the Yankees had their whole damn Yankees Broadway spectacular, so there's, lots of Yankee-oriented songs, Dalton Joe DiMaggio, and all sorts of other, songs referencing Catfish Hunter for whatever reason. Again, the Cubs have really struck gold with several songs. Like I mentioned, famous Cubs fan Eddie Vedder, of course, has his One Day the Cubs Will Go All the Way song, as well, of course, the granddaddy of all Cubs fan song, the epic Steve Goodman classic Go Cubs Go, which really became a very, very cool post-game tradition with, the 30,000 plus in attendance at Wrigley Field, all singing along to the Go Cubs Go, original theme song. That became a super cool tradition as well. Individual player theme songs have become a very cool tradition in baseball, and I guess kind of just due to the real individual nature of the sport of baseball. The players have, it really kind of lends itself for the players to have a lot more individuality and a lot more room for their own personal theme songs as they come up to bat or warm up to pitch. And that has become a super cool tradition. Unfortunately, really, really started and popularized in the Bronx, I'd say, by Mariano Rivera, who, when you heard the opening riff of Metallica's Enter Sandman, you knew that the door was going to be slammed shut and the Yankees were going to be, and then I guess another tradition would happen then after that is first Mariano would get his personal Enter the Sandman theme song, and then after that the Yankees would celebrate with the Frank Sinatra New York, New York, which became, I guess, very similar to the Go Cubs Go. Years before there was Go Cubs Go, there was New York, New York in Yankee Stadium, which would be the anthem that celebrated all Yankees wins. Well, I guess the tradition was really all Yankee wins would be celebrated by the Frank Sinatra New York, New York. Yankee losses, however, would be met with the very unfortunate Liza Minnelli New York, New York. Upon moving into the new stadium, things have changed, and I guess in this post-Me Too movement, a woman's version does not mean a lesser version, and now Frank Sinatra plays Win or Lose at Yankee Stadium. But as well, there was, like I was talking about, the player theme songs kind of started off with Mariano, and then shamelessly copied by another great closer of the 90s, but Trevor Hoffman, who tried to do the Hells Bells thing, and just like Trevor Hoffman was never anywhere near as good of a pitcher as Mariano, his whole Hells Bells thing never quite had the epic feel as did Enter Sandman, but that as well became a pretty strong tradition there, and I believe it's the kind of thing that every team really would have your own. Me being a Mets fan, Mets fans have a lot of songs that mean a lot within the Mets community, within the first three chords of Jimi Hendrix's Voodoo Child. You knew Mike Piazza was coming to the plate, and in the last couple seasons, Leonard Skinner's Simple Man has meant Jacob deGrom was going to be degrominating on the hill, whereas that wacky song from Game of Thrones meant Thor Syndergaard would be bringing his weird Scandinavian warrior look to the mound. And as well, the Mets have had lots of, much like Thor that does the Game of Thrones as kind of a quasi goof, I would say. They've also had a couple of other pretty hilarious theme songs where in recent years, Jonas Cespedes, the King of the Jungle, came out to the song from The Lion King, and everyone's favorite Wilmer Flores came out to Friends, because you'd really like to go to the Central Perk and grab a coffee with old Wilmer. Me, Wilmer, and Joey hanging out, trying to hit on Phoebe. But as well, for Mets fans, The Doors' middle stanza of L.A. Woman's Mojo Rising will forever mean the 99 Mets are making their wild card push, and the Baha Men classic, Who Let the Dogs Out, will forever mean shame to our one World Series win that the Mets had against the Yankees. Had to be ruined by a goddamn pre-game Baha Men concert, which, despite winning, all my friends had to fucking break my balls over the Baha Men playing. And you know what? I couldn't really say anything, Rick Reed got the win, burying the lead with the Baha Men. I gotta be honest. It was dark days at Game 3 of the Subway Series when the Baha Men hit the field at Shea. Other people that have hit the field at Shea that have then hit the stage and spun off into the music, whereas the kind of like athlete turned musician is really more of an NBA trait, where there's not like a roster that doesn't have two of their players that have a rap career. However, a little bit more rare in Major League Baseball, however, not unseen, where all New Yorkers, of course, are very familiar with Bernie Williams shoving his jazz guitar career down your throat post-Yankees success. And Bernie Williams, for somebody that grew up diehard Mets fan, hates the Yankees. It's a difficult task for you. You have to be a very likable dude to have won 5 rings for the Yankees, then put out a jazz guitar album, and for me not to hate you. However, Bernie Williams has got that done as really one of the all-time just class acts and great guys and great players and just real likable figures in New York sports. And that's me saying that about a Yankee, so that's pretty tough. High praise there. And Bernie Williams, very, very famously here in New York, spun off into a jazz guitar career that was actually pretty solid. He's literally like turned up at like every jazz club and bar that does like Thursday, like if there's like a local bar that does a Thursday night jazz show, there's a chance Bernie Williams is going to show up with copies of his new CD, as he was really passionate about his jazz guitar career and pretty solid work that we've all been forced to sit through here on New York Sports TV. As well, I guess the San Francisco Bernie Williams is Jake Peavy, who shamelessly used his fame and success to weasel on stage with like Phil Lesh and Bob Weir any chance he could. As Jake Peavy has done a lot of, at least Jake Peavy usually does charity shows, but Jake Peavy has done lots of Grateful Dead inspired performances and charity events and whatnot. And I guess why not? I mean, who doesn't love the Grateful Dead, especially in San Francisco? So Jake Peavy has definitely sidled up and made his presence felt on the heady San Francisco local music scene. And then, of course, there is Red Sox legend Bronson Arroyo, who probably not the player that Bernie or Jake Peavy are, but Bronson Arroyo was a very, very solid major league pitcher for years and years, who was a self-proclaimed musician first, baseball player second, and was a constant presence in the clubhouse, playing guitar and promoting whatever like local Boston bar his rock band would be playing at. But Bronson Arroyo was very, very much deeply connected into the music world. Bronson Arroyo, as well, from a Sports Illustrated article I read about him 15 years ago, holds the claim to have listened to the album 10 by Pearl Jam every day of his life since the album came out in 1992 or whatever. He had claimed that his daily routine throughout his entire major league career included listening to the album 10 while working out every day of his life. He had claimed to listen to the album 10, and as somebody that can be a little obsessive about the music they get into, I can totally see, and as well, I mean, who doesn't love 10 by Pearl Jam, one of the definitive classic albums of the I'd say probably top 5 album of the 90s, 10 by Pearl Jam. So, I mean, why not listen to it every day? But I can definitely understand the therapeutic nature of the same album on repeat every day for your entire life. As I'd say, Doggy Style was that. I'd say the album 10. I'd say Doggy Style was my Bronson Arroyo's 10 for my high school, my subpar high school career. So I get it, Bronson. I get it. So those are a couple of the songs of baseball and a couple of the players that might have played jazz guitar along to them. But as I'm sure every Bernie set includes a very hacky "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" in E minor or whatever from stupid Bernie's jazz guitar set. But those are a couple of the songs of baseball and the players who may perform them. However, I'd say really where baseball meets music is in between those white lines, where championships are won and stages are set up in center field for the bands to rock out on. And really since the beginning, I guess, of major stadium tours in America, which really, I guess, kind of became prevalent in, the early 70s, we'll call it, is really kind of where it became commonplace for, rock acts to do major cross-country stadium tours. Really at that time, when you look at it, especially kind of before, when you look at it in the early 70s, was really kind of before the spike in popularity from the NFL. And at that point, the NFL was kind of more of a fringe counterculture sport almost, that didn't have like their own 80,000 person stadium in every city like they do now. So at that time in the early 70s, baseball stadiums really were the main place for bigger than life concerts in America, and regularly throughout the 70s and 80s, bands such as the Rolling Stones, The Who, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, the Beach Boys, and the Grateful Dead all regularly performed at baseball stadiums across America, and I guess it probably all started off epically enough with a little band called the Beatles hitting America with Beatlemania in 1965. Of course, the Beatles came to the States in 64 with their Ed Sullivan appearance and a handful of shows at some theaters and stuff in America, a little place called Carnegie Hall. But the next summer, the Beatles came back with Beatlemania and a cross-country tour at some baseball stadiums as well. House the Beatles, where Atlanta Stadium, home of the Braves. Comiskey Park, the home of the Shy Sox out there in Chicago, hosted a concert of the Beatles. Hey, you're going to go see the Beatles concert? No, me neither. I'm going to go grab a couple of hot dogs. I don't want to watch those fags from Liverpool anyway. Comiskey Park hosted a concert from the Beatles, as did Metropolitan Stadium, home of the Twins, all hosted the Beatles in 1965, as well as Shea Stadium here in Queens, which hosted the first Beatles concert of the tour and the first real taste of Beatlemania to hit the States. All started with the four boys getting helicoptered into Queens and delivering what at the time was really one of the most epic concerts in the history of America. The 56,000 plus in attendance were the most to ever witness a concert in America, as it was as well the highest grossing concert to ever take place in the States. It was famously a total shit show and a disaster from the musical standpoint, where, as of course the Beatles famously played 30-minute sets at the time, headlining a bill that was comprised of several other acts, and then culminating in a 30-minute Beatles set that at the time was meant to be played over speakers that simply could not handle the sheer size of the stadium, nor the volume from the thousands of screaming chicks from Long Island. So the show had to take place over the in-stadium PA system. The, now batting number 2, that thing was the actual speakers of the show that was, by all accounts, inaudible due to, like I mentioned, just the sheer hysteria of the show. However, I feel, especially for all in attendance at the time, I guess the 30-minute performance on stage is kind of a backseat to the cultural phenomenon that just took place as the Beatles entered America and kicked off the Beatlemania, like I said. And I guess it's a very interesting tale, though, in the world of music, as we see it every year. Every summer there's a song of the summer, and then next year it's someone different. Next year it's not quite the same for that artist that had the epic hit last year, you know? And the Beatles were at a very interesting time of their career at that point in 65. And by the time the Beatles came back the following summer for a North American tour, things were perhaps a little different, you know? And I don't want to say that the Beatles went away, but Beatlemania had died down significantly. And as well, the Beatles had kind of changed musically. And I guess really one of the significant moments in the Beatles' career took place after that Shea Stadium show, where the Beatles legendarily spent the rest of the night hanging out with a little man named Bob Dylan at the Warwick Hotel in New York City, and they hung out with Bob Dylan all night long, who is apparently the only person on the planet that was not entirely impressed with the Beatles, and in some ways shamed the boys from Liverpool into being like, yeah, you guys are the biggest stars ever, but I mean, I want to hold your hand. Come on, I'm performing in front of nobody in the West Village, but these are 9-paragraph epics. I mean, geez, you can make some real music here, something from the heart and soul. And the Beatles followed that advice. And after that meeting with Bob Dylan had a significant kind of change in direction musically. And when they entered the States upon their 65 tour, it was the early portion of the Beatles' kind of more pop career, the I Saw Her Standing There and I Want to Hold Your Hand era. By the time they came back in 66, however, it was the Rubber Soul Revolver era of the Beatles, which was significantly less, commercially considered, and way more, the Beatles' musical inclinations coming out, as well as right before the tour was about to start in '66 was the famous John Lennon saying the Beatles were bigger than Jesus whole controversy, which drove a lot of the red state psychopaths nuts. And the Beatles' '66 tour was met with a lot of protests and hate and ill will, and a significant amount of empty seats, and a significant different vibe, we'll just say. As again, I don't want to say the hysteria went away from the Beatles, but things were very different. And a kind of a combination of all those things, of kind of the Beatles kind of popping out, in essence, mixed in with the change of direction musically and the controversial statements from John, things were not the same. And 56,000 people at Shea Stadium in '65 became 45,000 people at Shea Stadium in '66. And there was protests and demonstrations, and like I said, a lot of red state shenanigans going on at the Beatles concerts of Cleveland Stadium or Busch Park, where the Beatles played. As well, the Beatles played at a couple of the famous California baseball stadiums, making their appearance at Dodger Stadium in Chavez Ravine over in Los Angeles, as well as a stop at the famous home of the Giants, Candlestick Park, on August 29th, 1966, where the 25,000 in attendance, as well as the 8,000 empty seats, saw what the world did not know at the time. However, apparently the four boys from Liverpool on stage did. That would be the last Beatles concert to ever take place. The last Beatles concert to ever take place. Not the last American concert, not the last baseball stadium concert, not the last not the last Bay Area concert. No. The last Beatles show to ever take place. Well, I guess until, not counting the gathering on top of the Apple Studios when they just went up there and started rocking until the cops shut them down as promotion for the Let It Be album. I guess if you want to count the rooftop Let It Be show on top of Apple Studios, you want to count that, the last Beatles show, go for it. But the last promoted, sold Beatles concert was August 29th, 1966 in Candlestick Park. So if you're keeping track of your Beatles, by the way, just chew on this for a second. In that show, by the way, they did not perform one song from Revolver. So just think about it from the fact that sitting here in 2019, where bands make 90% of their music through live performances, and they go on tour every summer for every album, for every reason, for anything, the Beatles never did a supporting album. The Beatles never played live any tracks from Sgt. Pepper, The White Album, Yellow Submarine, Abbey Road, or Let It Be. Never contained a supporting tour. Not once did they ever play A Day in the Life live. No Guitar Gently Weeps, no Here Comes the Sun, ever live in a supporting concert. I mean, that's just really, really insane to think of of just the lost opportunity of the Beatles tours that would have been. And again, as well, like, I don't want to paint the picture that they stopped touring. You know, in large part, they really stopped touring due to how crazy and all the mayhem around the band, especially in the States, where some of it was negative. And again, at that point in the mid-'60s, stadiums were just not ready to handle logistically and, you know, musically, could just not handle a large-scale concert like that, whereas, you know, by the time Zeppelin started doing tours in '73, they had things a lot more figured out, and it became much more of, you know, the experience that you're more familiar with at a stadium show as opposed to getting played through the PA on a 30-minute set, you know. So obviously lots of different factors played into it as well. Like I said, financially, the Beatles not needing the tour financially was a big, you know, a big factor and a big departure from the world of music today, where you got to get out there and sing for your supper. And that was a different day for them, but the Beatles' touring career ended on that August 29th, 1966. Today, as well, I'll point out that on that '66 tour of the States, the farewell tour, what became the farewell tour from the Beatles, on that tour as well, they were legendarily exposed to the forthcoming Beach Boys album Pet Sounds, which was a revolutionary album and apparently a huge inspiration to the Beatles kind of going more concept, and the number one inspiration and precipice to the Sgt. Pepper Lonely Hearts Club Band album was Pet Sounds, who the boys have talked since then about how they were trying to make their own Pet Sounds with Sgt. Pepper. They were exposed to that album on that '66 tour as well. They were exposed to Little Girl Named Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, that played a very impactful part in the psychedelic transformation that took place for the rest of the Beatles' career. So between meeting Dylan and doing acid, the USA was just as meaningful to the Beatles as the Beatles were to the old US of A. And it all started with those concerts at Shea, or with that concert at Shea that became then a focal point of a documentary, The Beatles at Shea, which was a whole big concert documentary showing a lot of their New York press tour as well. For any Mets fans, showed John Lennon walking around the Mets locker room, so you got to check that out. And a pretty major concert documentary at Shea Stadium for the Beatles, and a tradition that has, like I said, been carried on to today, where bands frequently play the most beloved baseball stadiums in America. Recently, Pearl Jam played a couple of epic shows at Wrigley Field, which turned into the Let's Play 2 concert documentary that was screened at lots of the indie theaters, around the States, and, not quite a wide release, but a pretty accessible release was the Pearl Jam Let's Play 2 Wrigley Field concert documentary. As well, Dave Matthews has put out live albums from both Wrigley Field as well as Fenway Park. The Dropkick Murphys have a live album at Fenway Park. Selena recorded one of her classic live albums at the Astrodome in Houston. And some 40-something years after the Beatles came to Shea Stadium, Billy Joel shut it down as the last day at Shea was a epic Billy Joel concert that had a full circle kind of feel as he was aided in his performance by a little man named Sir Paul McCartney, who 40-plus years after getting helicoptered in and bringing Beatlemania to America, Paul McCartney helped Billy Joel sing Let It Be to close down Shea Stadium in 2008, and the home of so many great memories and joyous times for Mets fans, went dark and closed its doors. However, the closing of one stadium brought the opening of another. And just a couple months after Shea Stadium closed in 2008, in 2009, Citi Field opened up with a grand debut concert hosted by a little man named Sir Paul McCartney, who really brought it full circle in Queens, as well brought it full circle in San Francisco. Like I mentioned, the Beatles in '66 played their last concert in Candlestick Park. Candlestick Park held its last concert in 2014 by Paul McCartney. So he closed down the place that closed down the Beatles, as well as like I said, bringing it full circle in Queens with really opening up Shea Stadium with that big concert, opening up Citi Field with that concert, helping close down Shea. Who would have thought Paul McCartney has played such a grand part in baseball stadium history? But the man's epic, and he's epic for a reason. And it's stories like that. And Citi Field, he helped opened up, has continued the tradition of hosting concerts, an annual residency, an annual summer residency from Dead & Co. will continue again in 2019. As well, they annually host concerts from the Zac Brown Band. They've hosted concerts from Lady Gaga and Beyonce, as well as the Foo Fighters, Fleetwood Mac. The Doobie Brothers, Earth, Wind & Fire, 50 Cent and Nas have played in Citi Field. Citi Field has also started its own music festival, the Meadows Fest in Flushing Meadows Park, mainly taking place in Citi Field. So Paul McCartney got the ball rolling, and now it has snowballed out of control. As Shea Stadium's not the only, or Citi Field is not the only stadium as well hosting concerts this summer. As Billy Joel, who I just mentioned, helping close down Shea Stadium with assistance from Paul McCartney, but the epic Billy Joel Last Day at Shea's, epic Billy Joel Last Day at Shea concert is coming back to baseball stadiums near you this summer, where Billy Joel will embark on a baseball stadium mini tour, where in addition to his Madison Square Garden residency, he'll be taking it on the road this summer, going to select baseball parks across America. He will play the first ever concert at Camden Field in Baltimore, as well as play Chase Field in Arizona, Miller Park in Milwaukee, Coors Field in Denver, Arlington Park in Texas. He'll be doing Fenway in Boston, as well as Phish. We'll be bringing the Psychedelic Circus back to Fenway for the first time since '09. Phish will be playing at Fenway. Phish has also played in Wrigley Field a couple shows. So Phish are no stranger to the ballpark as well. Fenway Park, the week previous to the show, Fenway Park will hold a Phish night, a sanctioned Phish night at Fenway Park, which will be pretty special. Of course, Phish with their New England roots, you know, of course, being birthed at the University of Vermont. And although being Jersey boys, I will point out, Trey and Paige, both from Jersey, however, really more of a New England band with their home roots in New England and in that Boston area where their fan base is so strong. Fenway will hold a sanctioned Phish night which has become very commonplace, really ever since Fare Thee Well in 2015, of course, the last Grateful Dead shows. It has become very, very commonplace for Major League Baseball stadiums to hold Grateful Dead nights, where actually the first Grateful Dead night was held all the way back in 2010 in San Francisco, but really ever since 2015, like I mentioned with Fare Thee Well, it's been very common, based as well just on the massive popularity of the Dead. It has been very common for any stadium in particular across the country to host Grateful Dead nights, as over the past couple years, the Pirates, Brewers, Cardinals, Phillies, Cubs, White Sox, Red Sox, Reds, Giants, and A's have all hosted sanctioned Grateful Dead nights where they've given away anything from T-shirts to Jerry Garcia bobbleheads, and usually contain a pregame concert from some shitty local Grateful Dead cover band, as well as a lot of them as well are run through the Rex Foundation, which is the Grateful Dead charity, or one of the Grateful Dead charities, but a lot of fully sanctioned Grateful Dead nights have taken place. And why not, where the Grateful Dead as well were no stranger to baseball stadiums, playing at many of the baseball stadiums all throughout the country, as well playing at their home stadium in the Bay Area, where they're famously from. But the Oakland Coliseum, home of the A's, has the famous distinction of hosting more concerts than any other venue out of the 2,100 plus, the Guinness Book of World Records, 2,100 plus concerts that the Grateful Dead put on. More than any of those, 66 of them to be exact, were held at the Oakland Coliseum, home of the A's and home of the Dead as well. Perhaps the most famous baseball promotional night, however, was not a Jerry Garcia bobblehead night, but Disco Demolition Night at Comiskey Park down there in Chicago hosted the famous Demolition Night in July of '79, in the middle of a White Sox-Tigers doubleheader. Local rock and roll radio DJ Steve Dahl was hosting a promotion where, to combat the popularity of Saturday Night Fever and the current disco craze ruining the Chicago rock scene, Steve Dahl collected as many disco CDs as he could from people. People showed up to the game, volunteered all of their disco albums, okay? In between the games, they brought all of the albums into center field in a big pile and then blew them up. All right, bunch of crazy rock and roll fans stormed the field, tear the shit out of the place, kick up the grass, tear out the bases, fucking rip up the mound, like totally make a mess of the place. The place has to be shut down, Game 2 canceled, and forfeited to the Tigers. Where, I don't know if the disco died, but the rock certainly lived at Disco Demolition Night at Comiskey Park in Chicago, the most famous musical baseball promotion night. I want to end the feature here, though, with one more quick story, and it's not necessarily a baseball music connection as much as it is perhaps a baseball Jammin' World connection. But I want to quickly give you guys the story, the very true story of Doc Ellis, the only pitcher in the history of Major League Baseball to pitch a no-hitter while tripping balls on acid. And yes, that is the true legend of Doc Ellis, who was a famous pitcher, who was a very solid major league pitcher throughout his career, outside of the tripping no hitter. But Doc Ellis, very solid pitcher over his career, spent time with the Pirates and Yankees most notably, as well as the A's and Mets. over the course of his career was 138 and 119 with a 3.46 ERA. Was the starting pitcher in the 1971 All-Star Game, as well as the 1976 Comeback Player of the Year. Over his career, won a World Series with the Pirates and a pennant with the Yankees. So, legitimate player, right? Legitimate pitcher, but also known to very much indulge in the psychedelic lifestyle of the early 70s. And on one particular night in 1970, as legend has it, the Pittsburgh Pirates were going from San Francisco to San Diego to play the Padres, and Doc Ellis made a stop off in his hometown of Los Angeles. I guess he was not pitching on the Wednesday. They were off on the Thursday. Stops off in Los Angeles, all right. Gets up to a little bit of partying he's drinking. He claims a couple of screwdrivers and a whole lot of acid. All right. Next thing you know, he wakes up and eats a little bit more acid, thinking it's his Thursday off day, all right? A couple hours go by when his friend's girlfriend informs him that, no, it's indeed Friday, and you're scheduled to be pitching in San Diego in a couple hours, all right? He gets rushed to the airport by his friend, hops a shuttle, all right, makes it to the stadium an hour and a half before the game, apparently tripping balls, all right? Now, how hard was he tripping? He apparently claims to have been tripping so hard he felt like the baseball was at times the size and weight of a volleyball, and claims that for large portions of the games, claims to have not been able to see the catcher. So he doesn't see the catcher. He thinks he's throwing a volleyball. I mean, really, like, you know, like, how hard was he tripping? I get, like, he was tripping so hard that he thought it was a good idea to play the game. Like, call out sick, for fuck's sake. You're tripping your balls. You can't get out there and play Major League Baseball. But no, tripping so hard, he thinks it's a good idea to say, put me in, coach. I'm ready to play. And he goes out, despite not being able to see the catcher, throws in the general vicinity of the hitter. All right, over the course of the game, walks 8, hits 1, and acts very, very weird the entire time, all right? He claimed to have tried to maintain such focus and distract himself from the paranoia being induced by tripping in front of 15,000 people that he spent a lot of time focused on cleaning the dirt off his cleats. So everybody thought it was weird that he spent the entire game, like, frantically cleaning the dirt off his cleats, as well then as, like, baseball's a very tradition-laden sport. The tradition in baseball is if somebody's pitching a no-hitter, you don't talk to him, you leave him alone. When the teammates, he had no idea he was pitching a no-hitter. When the teammates were leaving him alone, it made him feel that they were all mad at him for obviously pitching while tripping. And that only, like, heightened his anxiety, brings it up to a teammate who then points out, no, dude, we're not mad at you. You're pitching a no-hitter in the 8th inning. Which was news to Doc Ellis, who really had to buckle down for the last couple innings. All right, fast forward to the bottom of the 9th. 2 outs, 2 strikes, Ed Spezio at the plate. Doc Ellis gets him swinging to complete the most legendary no-hitter in the history of baseball, where people in New York want to talk about David Wells being hung over for the perfect game. Well, Doc Ellis did you one better than that. And at the time, people didn't really know either. You know, the legend didn't really come out till years later, when Doc Ellis finally started answering questions about his erratic behavior in that no-hitter, and admitted that at the time he claimed that he was drunk off of screwdrivers being the cause of all of the weirdness, but years later admitted that he was indeed tripping, which made perfect sense to all of his teammates. That very much verified the accounts that, like I mentioned, he was very psychedelically indulgent. So not necessarily news to the teammates, however, did not become the urban legend that it is now until years later, where at the time it was the pre-information age, There was no Sports Center, there was no internet. There was only the very traditional baseball box score, and much like today is very traditional. Baseball, like I mentioned, is a tradition-heavy sport. And the tradition of baseball, even to this day, is you check the box scores. Who needs Sports Center? You go to the paper and you look at the box score. And then when you look at the box score in baseball, the way the players are identified is they take the last name of the player and they say that first. Then they take the first initial of the first name and say that last, right? So this podcast would be hosted by Waylon L. It would be Garcia J, Almond D, Jagger M. That's how you read a baseball box score, So if you were just your average baseball fan on June 13th, 1970, you woke up and you went to the papers and you didn't read online about how Doc Ellis pitched a no-hitter while tripping. You just simply looked at the box score. And you saw that the Pirates had 2 runs, 5 hits, no errors. The Padres had no runs, no hits, and no errors. And the winning pitcher was LSD. And in the words of the great John Sterling, that is baseball, Susan. And that is where the music world met the baseball world right here on the Jammin World. Big LW's Jammin World podcast. If I missed any musical baseball connections, if you want to tell me about an epic concert that took place at a baseball stadium near you, or you want to tell me about a hilariously douchey player that you were forced to sit through a music set, definitely let me know. Jammin World Podcast at Yahoo. That's JA2MsIN, no G, World Podcast at Yahoo.
Big F! WEFUNK. We funk.